Sorry about that. I had a break real quick. The convergent evolution indicates there are three groups of organisms, all have different ancestors, but all had kind of the same problem. And they all evolved into having wings to solve that problem. So we call that convergent evolution. It's an inversion, or it's evolution that is converging to have the same function. So maybe they don't have the uh, same ancestor, but they evolved to solve the same kind of problem they have. In this case, they want to fly, they evolved to fly. Other examples of convergent evolution would be mimicry, where these organisms, like the monarch butterfly, which is poisonous, um, and all predators know it's poisonous. So other organisms over time evolve, other butterflies evolve to look exactly like the monarch to avoid being eaten. And again, that's because these random mutations start to make it look similar to the monarch, and therefore eventually it looks almost identical. Um, Other examples of mimicry would, in this case, which one do you think is the fly and the bee? Look kind of similar. Which one's the fly and which one's the bee? So there you go. It looks very similar. They mimic each other to avoid being eaten. Another example would be which one's the moth and which one's the bee. Look very similar. Moth doesn't want to get eaten, so it starts to look very similar to the bee, and therefore allowing it to survive longer, make more babies, and reproduce and have more characteristics similar to itself. Other structures we look at are called vestigial structures. These are usually structures that aren't used by the particular organisms, but they're evidence of past use. So in this case, in whale fossils, they have this primitive leg bones. Didn't use them. Eventually, they went away over time. So it's evidence of these prior structures in the particular organism. So examples for humans would be our tailbone. Our tailbone is indication shows that we used to have a tail. It's evidence that we had a tail that was used for balance or grabbing or whatever a tail might be used for. And another example would be an appendix. We don't need our appendix, but it is evidence of a prior use. Another example of another piece of evidence for evolution is what we call comparative embryology. And so what it is we're comparing embryos and the development of embryos, I should say, the development of embryos between different species. So looking at how a turtle evolves compared to, how a turtle compares to a chick. And you see, primitively, they look very similar, but as they start to develop, they develop differences, but still look very similar at this early stage. So again, this is evidence that we all started to develop the same, all organisms start to develop the same or very similarly, but over time we obviously diverge and become different. But again, it's a piece of evidence of evolution that we all descended from a common ancestor. Next piece of evidence is the molecular record. So looking at DNA and protein structure and comparing different species. So when you look at all these different species, we are comparing the amino acids that code for human hemoglobin. So in this case, you see with a monkey, we only have 8 amino acids different compared to a lamprey, which is 125 amino acids that are different in the human hemoglobin protein. So again, this is evidence for evolution, evidence that we are all commonly related, some more common than others. So this might be, when we look at 2 different organisms, this might be evidence that we're related fairly closely to each other, whereas the differentiation between a lamprey and a human was a long time ago. Next piece of evidence for evolution is artificial selection. So this is actual evolution that humans have caused. And so when we look at the mustard seed plant, primitive mustard seed plant, this was usually a wild mustard. We've evolved this mustard into various types of vegetables, like Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, broccoli, kale, and so on. So humans have modified the mustard genetically and bred them in a specific way so that we would develop these different types of vegetables. Another great example would be dogs, how we breed dogs to have various characteristics. We used to have a poodle, and we used to have Labrador, or a Labrador. And now we have a Labradoodle. Mixing these breeds up to have various characteristics, whether it be not shedding in a poodle, in the poodle's case, or intelligence, or scent, smell, like hunter dogs, all develop different characteristics, and humans have bred them for those characteristics. Again, this is evolution that's artificial because humans have caused it. Darwin. Kelsey's dad mentioned that Darwin was an expert in pigeons, and he bred pigeons, and we see all the variety of pigeons that he bred, and all those different styles of pigeons. And again, this is all artificial selection. He bred them specifically for this purpose, to look this specific way. Some unexpected results of artificial selection have been examples of antibiotics and pesticides, where with pesticides we go ahead and throw all these pesticides on these plants, and yes, they kill a majority of the insects, but every once in a while you have an insect that is immune to that particular poison, and that insect now survives, can reproduce, and that entire population becomes immune to the pesticide, and pesticide becomes useless. Next is a similar example of antibiotic resistance. So when we have bacteria, antibiotics kill bacteria. But every once in a while, bacteria will develop this immunity to the antibiotic, and that bacteria will continue to grow, continue to be spread, and eventually the antibiotic becomes useless, which is a problem because we only have a certain amount of antibiotics out there that are useful nowadays. It's only a few that are really useful, and if we lose one of them, it's a big deal. There we go. That's the story. They reproduce, and now all their babies are resistant. All right. One of the last examples of evolution is biogeography. So looking at life and how life has developed in different places. A great example would be looking at comparing mammals in the Americas compared to Australian marsupials, both mammals. But the placental mammals they develop in the placenta, just like humans. But Australian marsupials, they have the pouch. But we see a lot of similar characteristics between these two individuals. They are not closely related, but because their environment was very similar, they all evolved similarly. So again, to repeat that, the environment was very similar, and because the environment is similar, these organisms, these mammals, evolved similarly to adapt to that environment, to become more successful in that environment. And that's it. So thanks, guys. I'll see you tomorrow. Have a good night.